Next speaker is Baroness Fox of Buckley.
My lords, the noble Lord Adonis and I have argued over so many things over so many years, it's not true. But I have to say, that was a bravura performance, and he raises some very, very important issues, particularly in relation to whether we need this legislation or whether legislation is used as a substitute for strategy. And I particularly noted his point about the lack of funding for FE, that there is a danger that this legislation will simply be a way of signalling an approach but not actually practically helping. I thought he did an excellent job of the Emperor's new clothes being exposed there. I do want to just correct him one point, which is that we haven't left Europe, we left the EU, and that as a Brexiteer I am actually a great fan and advocate of German vocational education, matter of fact. Actually, firstly, I want to apologise that I didn't speak in the second reading. My IT skills rather failed me. I should probably go on a course. I thought I'd listed myself online but failed to press the right button. But I do support the aspirations of this bill, and it's close to my heart because, as a former further education lecturer, a sector that's too often been treated as a Cinderella sector, I am hoping that further education will at last arrive at the ball. However, there are aspects of this bill that could, ironically, limit opportunities, and it's one reason that I'm very sympathetic to the amendments, particularly 1 to 6 in this group, and especially the remarks initiated by the noble Lord Lucas. I want to avoid making a Second Amendment speech. However, I want to just make a broad point about a distinction that I think it's important to remember as we go through all the amendments at report stage. And it's why I want the bill to avoid being overly narrow or being overly prescriptive about outcomes, as I think this can backfire and lead to unintended consequences. While we are focusing on the neglected areas of vocational qualifications, skills and training, one danger is that we assume that certain social groups of young people are just not cut out for academic education. Too often it is assumed in the skills and training discussion, and when we talk about how we can target and help people with skills and training, that we're talking about working class youth. But I think that that's dangerously deterministic. And this has already put pressure on schools in certain social areas to see education as a preparation for the labour market. And I think that cuts against the principle of building a society or education based on merit. So to boldly state, every child has a right to an academic education until 16, in my opinion, and even if they choose not to pursue an academic route after that, it's their entitlement to be introduced to the best that's thought and known, and that allows every young person, whether they end up as a plumber or a philosopher, access through schooling to a working knowledge of cultural capital, history, literature, the scientific method and so on. The trainee hairdressers and the car mechanics that I taught literature to were more than the jobs they eventually acquired, and we should be wary of a narrowly instrumental version of vocationalism as well, as it can limit opportunities and aspirations. And one concern I have with the bill is that it focuses too narrowly on the skills required by local employers, as has already been raised by the noble Baroness Morris and Lord Adonis. Local employers can be, no disrespect to them, short-term and short-sighted and don't always see the long view. As these amendments emphasise, the ones I'm supporting, local employers may not always be best placed to see the bigger picture, and that in turn can narrow the options for students. Take, for example, a geographic area traditionally associated with the fishing industry, an area I would like to see a lot more investment in terms of apprenticeships and so on. But are we to assume that the locality will only ever need skills related to fishing? But also, there might well be more future-orientated skills, not needed as yet, that could create new industries, such as marine biology. Of course, it sounds positive when the DFE says that the bill will meet the needs of local areas so that people no longer need to leave their hometowns to find great jobs. And I thought Baroness Morris, when she made the point, actually, about place, that's something I'm very keen on remembering. But, and I like this soundbite of improving communities rather than just providing a ladder out of them. But it would be also wrong to confine people or even trap them into jobs related to the needs of the locality they live in. If you live in an area that is largely agricultural, but aspire to be an engineer in car manufacturing or work in construction in the city, will you be able to access skills that will allow you to move if we confine skills available to those that only the local employers decide on? If you were an inner-city youth who dreams of working in farming, however, will you be able to access skills if local bosses can't imagine ever needing or training someone to pursue such an agricultural career? And I think that Amendments 1 and 6 and the motivation by the Noble Lord Lucas tackles these issues, these potentially limiting anomalies in the bill. More generally, one of the ironies of focusing on catering for local needs is that this limits who decides on local priority just to local employers, but takes power away not only from students locally, as has been mentioned, but also from local civic leaders. We've heard about mayors being excluded, but actually also local further education college principals. What Tom Buick, the Chief Executive of the Federation of Awarding Bodies, calls a top-down power grab on qualifications. And to quote him, he says, "It is regrettable that the provisions of this bill and the government's wider qualifications review seeks to stifle investment, innovation and choice in the future of effectively nationalising technical qualifications via a Whitehall-driven, top-down command and control approach." Certainly, as later amendments try and address, the bill introduces new regulatory layers of approval politically controlled from the centre, for example, the need for approval by the Secretary of State for the new statutory local skills improvement plan. So it claims to be local, but how local is it beyond that of local employers? I am also sympathetic to Amendment 8 put forward by the Noble Baroness Whittaker, Baroness Greengross and others, addressing the attainment gap. The bill is limited in supporting those who have not attained grade 4 or above in English. And Simon Parkinson, the Chief Executive of the Workers' Educational Association, noted that the bill is, quote, quiet on support for any qualifications below level 3 that offer many adult learners key progression routes. And I'm sympathetic to thinking about broadening this out. Many years ago, probably decades ago now, I launched a Return to Learning course for women that had no qualifications, and they were actually often young women, and to note that I taught a broad liberal arts course. And I agree with the WA that it's worrying that the bill does little to support subjects outside a narrow band of technical disciplines. But for the women that I taught, it was an introduction to literature and history and creative writing, and no doubt local employers would think it was a complete and total waste of time. But it actually allowed those women to acquire confidence and skills, and actually, ultimately, in some instances, a GCSE in English, that was a stepping stone to them taking training courses, reskilling, and many went on to, for example, one to be a nurse, one to be a police officer, and one doing a course in animal husbandry, another eventually running a successful beauty business and earning a fortune. So my main takeaway from that is that we can't be too prescriptive in what it will be that we want to achieve when we're training people by narrowly saying the only skills that matter are decided by local bosses. We'll decide what the skills we'll need in this area are into the future, and we lack any imagination to think beyond that. And that actually sometimes non-training, non-skills, but education, my lords, can lead people into the world of training and skills, and we shouldn't neglect that either.
Yeah.